I never thought my 79th birthday would be the day I'd hear my own children toast to my demise. Yet there I was, standing in the hallway outside my dining room, clutching a vase of fresh-cut hydrangeas from my greenhouse, as Knox raised his glass and said those words. To Mom's last birthday bash. May she finally find peace, and may we find what she's been hiding all these years. They all laughed. Knox, Beryl, and even Pax, my youngest, the one who still called me every Sunday without fail. The crystal glasses clinked while I stood frozen, the corner of the wall hiding me from their view. My hands trembled, sending water droplets from the stems onto my sensible shoes. For 40 years, I had nurtured rare species of flowers that botanists across 3 states sought out. My greenhouse on the outskirts of Duluth was once written up in Horticulture magazine as Wilhelmina Kovach's Temple of Botanical Wonders. Now it was mortgaged to the hilt, and my children were toasting to my death as casually as they might discuss the Minnesota weather. I should have known. The signs were there in how Beryl had suddenly started visiting more frequently, bringing her clipboard and asking casual questions about my paperwork. In how Knox had called 3 times in 1 month, unprecedented since he'd moved to Texas 15 years ago. In how Pax had offered to help organize my study, where I kept my financial records. Do you think she suspects? Beryl's voice drifted out. About us knowing? Mom doesn't have a clue, Knox replied. Doc Henderson's office shouldn't have left those test results where you could see them, but what's done is done. Stage 1 isn't a death sentence these days, but at her age. And with her stubbornness about treatment, Pax added. So that's how they knew. My diagnosis. My secret. Dr. Henderson had urged chemotherapy, but I'd asked for time to consider my options. At 79, I wasn't sure I wanted to spend my remaining years sick from treatment rather than sick from disease. That decision was supposed to be mine alone. The burning in my chest wasn't from the cancer. It was rage, pure and cleansing. I placed the hydrangeas on the hallway table and straightened my handmade lace collar, a remnant from my mother's trousseau brought over from Prague in 1952. I smoothed down the front of my emerald green dress, the color I wore on special occasions, the one that made my gray eyes look almost blue. Then I walked into the dining room with my shoulders back and chin high, the way my father had taught me to enter a room when the communists came to question him. I hope you've left room for cake, I announced, my accent thickening as it always did when emotion got the better of me. Though I must apologize, it may not be my last after all. The silence was immediate. 3 pairs of eyes, all variations of my own, widened in shock. Beryl recovered first, always the quickest of my children. Mom, we were just toasting to my last birthday. I heard you clearly. I moved to the head of the table, my table brought over from our first apartment when Joseph and I married. Joseph, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for the first greenhouse. Joseph, who had never lived to see his children become these strangers before me. Mother, you don't understand. Knox started, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used with waitstaff who got his order wrong. I held up my hand. I understand perfectly. You know about my diagnosis. What you don't know, what none of you bothered to ask, is what I plan to do about it. I sat down and reached for the bottle of Merlot they had opened. A cheap one, despite Knox's 6-figure salary. I poured myself a generous glass, ignoring Dr. Henderson's warnings about alcohol. You've all been so interested in my affairs lately, my paperwork, my medical appointments, my finances. I took a long sip, feeling the warmth spread down my throat. So let me save you the trouble of further investigation. There is no hidden fortune, no secret bank account, no valuable antiques except perhaps my collection of rare flower specimens, which are scientifically valuable but financially worthless. Pax leaned forward, his normally placid face now anxious. Mom, that's not why. When your father died, he left significant medical debt. The greenhouse business covered it for years until the big corporate nursery opened across town. Then came the investment scheme from a man who said he could save my business. I laughed, but it came out like a bark. He saved nothing but his own bank account. I watched their faces change as understanding dawned. Knox's calculating eyes narrowed. Beryl's lips pressed into a thin line. Only Pax looked genuinely confused. But your property, Beryl began. is mortgaged. The business is underwater. My Social Security barely covers my medication. I placed my glass down with a thud. So, my children, the toast should actually be, to your inheritance of nothing but debt. The silence that followed was the loudest I'd ever heard. Knox's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Beryl stared at her manicured nails as if they might provide an escape route. Pax looked as if I had struck him. I don't believe you, Knox finally said. You're just saying this to what? Punish you for plotting around my illness? For treating me like I'm already dead? I stood up, feeling a wave of dizziness that I refused to acknowledge. Check my papers, call my bank, do whatever investigation you need, but perhaps start by asking how your mother feels about having cancer. None of them moved. None of them spoke. The cake, store-bought and sitting on the counter, remained uncut. Now, I said, reaching for my purse. I'm going out. Don't wait up. Where are you going? Beryl asked, finally finding her voice. I paused at the doorway and looked back at my children. These strangers with my blood, Joseph's eyes, my mother's chin. To plan the rest of my life, however long or short it may be. The sun was setting over Lake Superior as I drove away from the house where I had raised 3 children, buried a husband, and built a business that had once been the pride of the local botanical community. The spring air was still crisp with Minnesota's lingering winter, but my greenhouse would be warm and humid, filled with the orchids and rare alpine specimens that had been my life's work. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. The cancer diagnosis had been a shock 2 weeks ago, but somehow, it hadn't hurt as much as hearing my children's voices tonight. At the end of Lakeshore Drive, instead of turning toward my greenhouse, I took the road heading north. I had no destination in mind, but for the first time in decades, I felt something unfamiliar rising in my chest alongside the anger and fear. It felt strangely like freedom. I drove until the gas gauge warned me to stop, pulling into a small motel that advertised vacancy in flickering neon. The elderly man at the front desk barely looked at me as I paid cash for one night. In the sparse room, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let the tears come. Not for the cancer, not for the money, but for the realization that I had raised 3 children who were waiting for me to die. My phone buzzed with messages. I turned it off and lay back on the stiff pillows, making a mental list of what remained in my life. A failing business, a house I could no longer afford, a body that was betraying me, and a decision about treatment that suddenly seemed clearer. If I had less time than I'd thought, I needed to make it count, and I knew exactly where to start. With Delphinia Wasserstein, Del, my oldest friend, who had told me 20 years ago that I was raising vultures, not children. Del, who had offered to help me revive my business with her radio connections. Del, who had never minced words or wasted time. Tomorrow, I would call her. Tonight, I would sleep. Really sleep. For the first time since the doctor had said the word malignant. Because tomorrow, Wilhelmina Kovac would begin the business of living, even if it was just to spite those who were waiting for her to die. The moonlight filtered through thin curtains as I finally drifted off, dreams filled not with fear or regret, but with the vibrant colors of the rarest flowers in my collection, the ones that bloomed most brilliantly under adverse conditions. Morning light sliced through the motel curtains, painting stripes across the worn carpet. I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting the events that had driven me to this anonymous room with its faint smell of cleaning products and old cigarettes. Then it all came rushing back, the birthday, the toast, the revelation, and my dramatic exit. At 79, I'd never spent a night alone in a motel. Joseph and I had always preferred our own bed, even during vacations. After his death, I rarely traveled farther than the Minneapolis Botanical Gardens. Now here I was, waking up 60 miles from home with nothing but yesterday's clothes and my purse. My phone showed 17 missed calls, 8 from Pax, 5 from Beryl, 3 from Knox, and 1 from Delphinia. I listened only to Del's message. Willie, your children are swarming my house like angry hornets. Whatever you did has them in a state. Call me when you can, and well done, whatever it was. I smiled despite myself. Del had never had children of her own, a fact she credited for her longevity and sharp mind. As a former radio personality whose voice had once been heard across 3 states, she had developed a sixth sense about people. She'd warned me about my investment advisor years before he disappeared with my money and the savings of dozens of other Duluth residents. I called her back, my voice rough from sleep and emotion. "I've upended everything," I told her after explaining the previous night. "I have nowhere to go now." "Nonsense," Dell replied. "You're coming here. I've needed a roommate since Herbert died, and you're the only person I can tolerate for more than an hour. Besides, your children would never think to look for you at the neighborhood witch's house." Dell's self-appointed title as the neighborhood witch stemmed from her habit of telling uncomfortable truths and her garden of medicinal herbs that neighborhood children believed were for casting spells. In reality, she made tinctures for her arthritis and teas for her digestion. "I can't impose—" "Wilhelmina Kovac, I've known you for 30 years. In that time, you've imposed exactly never. Now pack up whatever you have and come over. I've made your children believe you've gone to your cousin in Chicago." "I don't have a cousin in Chicago." "They don't know that. They know remarkably little about you, it seems." That simple observation hit harder than I expected. What did my children actually know about me? Did they know that before coming to America, I had studied at the Prague Botanical Institute? That I had once cultivated a flower believed extinct since the 1940s? That their father had proposed to me in a field of wildflowers, promising I would never have to leave behind my passion? They knew I had money once, before the business declined and the investment fraud. And apparently, that was all that mattered. 2 hours later, I pulled into Dell's driveway. Her home was a Victorian, painted in defiant purples and blues, standing out among the subdued colors of the neighborhood. Like Dell herself, the house refused to fade into the background. "You look terrible," she greeted me at the door, her tall frame still imposing, despite her 81 years. "But righteous anger suits you." Inside, over tea strong enough to dissolve metal, I told her about the cancer. Stage 1, treatable, according to Dr. C. Henderson, with surgery and chemotherapy. Survivable, perhaps, but at what cost to the quality of my remaining years? "And you haven't decided about treatment?" Dell asked, her voice neutral. "How can I decide anything when I can't even afford my mortgage? The greenhouse is failing. The treatment costs are astronomical, even with Medicare." Dell tapped her long fingers against her teacup. In her younger days, those hands had adjusted radio dials and interviewed local celebrities. Now they were mottled with age spots, but still elegant. "The greenhouse," she said thoughtfully. "That's where we start." "Start what?" "Your resurrection, of course." Dell's plan unfolded over the next 3 days. I would stay with her, saving on housing costs. We would transform my greenhouse business from a retail operation into a specialized conservation project, focusing on rare and endangered flora. Dell still had connections at the university and the state environmental agency. "People will pay fortunes for conservation, especially with the climate changing," she explained. "They'll fund your expertise to save plants they've never heard of." It seemed far-fetched until Thaddeus Wynne arrived at Dell's doorstep on the 4th day. Thaddeus had been Yosef's friend before becoming mine, a botanist whose work on northern alpine species had earned him recognition across the scientific community. "Wilhelmina," he greeted me with a formal bow that always made me smile. At 83, he retained the courtly manners of his southern upbringing. "I hear you're embarking on a new venture." Dell had called him, of course. The 3 of us sat in her garden, surrounded by herbs and the early spring flowers pushing through the soil. "Your hybrid orchid collection alone could secure university backing," Thaddeus said, referring to the crossbreeds I'd developed over decades. "Add your work with endangered Minnesota prairie flowers, and you have the foundation for a serious conservation institute." "Who would fund such a thing?" I asked. "The Northland Botanical Trust, for one," he replied. "I'm on their board. We've been looking for exactly this kind of project." Hope, that most delicate of flowers, began to bloom in my chest. But then reality intruded, sharp as thorns. "My children expect me to return home and quietly prepare to die," I said bluntly. "They'll interfere, especially when they realize there might be value in my work." "Then don't tell them," Dell said simply. "Let them think you're just a stubborn old woman fighting cancer. Meanwhile, We'll transform your life's work into something that outlasts all of us. That evening, as Dell and Thaddeus discussed grant proposals and university partnerships, my phone rang. Knox. I answered on the third ring. "Where are you?" he demanded without preamble. "We've been worried sick." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but I had heard his toast, his laugh. I steeled myself. "I'm safe. I needed time to think." "You can't just disappear at your age, with your condition," he said, lowering his voice on the last words as if cancer were shameful. "We've been calling hospitals, thinking you'd collapsed somewhere." "I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself," I replied. "I've been doing it since before you were born." "Mom." His voice softened in that way that had always worked when he wanted something. "We need to talk about arrangements, practical matters. Beryl has been researching treatment options, and Pax found some clinical trials. I'll make my own medical decisions. But the cost is my concern." I took a deep breath. "Knox, I appreciate that you're worried, but I need space right now." "Space?" His voice rose. "You have cancer, Mom. You don't have time for space." The cruelty of his words, even if unintentional, struck me like a physical blow. In the background, I heard Beryl's voice asking for the phone. "Mom," she said moments later, her businesslike tone in place. "This is irrational behavior. Come home and we'll sort everything out. Your house, your medical care, everything." I looked at Dell and Thaddeus, both pretending not to listen while clearly absorbing every word. I thought of my greenhouse, my flowers, my life's work that might yet become something meaningful. I thought of the cancer cells multiplying in my body, of the difficult decisions ahead. "I'll be home in 3 days," I said finally. "Not before. And when I return, it will be to my house, on my terms." After hanging up, I turned to my friends. 3 days to save my life's work. Where do we start? We worked through the night. Thaddeus made calls to colleagues at the university. Dell drafted a press release about the formation of the Kovach Institute for Botanical Preservation, making it sound as if it already existed. By morning, I had begun cataloging my most valuable specimens from memory, creating a database of what the greenhouse contained. On the second day, we visited my greenhouse. I used my key to enter through the back, avoiding the retail area where my part-time employee might be working. The humid air wrapped around me like an embrace, the familiar sense of soil and green growth filling my lungs. "This is incredible," Thaddeus whispered, staring at my collection of rare orchids. "Some of these varieties, I thought they existed only in lab settings now." "Joseph built these climate-controlled rooms," I explained, showing him the separate chambers where different species thrived. Before computers made it easy, he designed manual systems to maintain perfect conditions. I ran my hand along the wooden shelving Joseph had installed 30 years ago. The wood was still solid, still supporting trays of seedlings and flowering plants. Like me, it had aged but remained functional. By evening, we had photographed and documented over 200 rare specimens. Thaddeus had made arrangements with the university's botanical department to evaluate my collection. Dell had scheduled a meeting with a lawyer who specialized in establishing non-profit organizations. On the third day, as promised, I returned home. The house seemed smaller somehow, its rooms filled with memories that now felt tainted by the knowledge of my children's expectations. I walked through each space, touching furniture, photographs, the accumulated possessions of a long life. In my study, I found evidence of intrusion: papers slightly rearranged, desk drawers not quite closed. They had been searching, these children of mine, for proof of their inheritance or lack thereof. I was brewing tea when the doorbell rang. All 3 of them stood on the porch, Knox in his business suit despite it being Sunday, Beryl clutching her ever-present clipboard, and Pax looking uncomfortable in the background. "We need to talk," Knox said as they filed in. "About your future." I gestured toward the living room. "Yes, we do." They sat together on the sofa, a united front. I took Joseph's old armchair, feeling his absence keenly in this moment. "I've made some decisions," I began before they could speak. "I'm keeping my house. I'm continuing my work. And yes, I will pursue treatment for the cancer." Their relief was visible, shoulders collectively relaxing. "That's wonderful news, Mom," Beryl said, already flipping pages on her clipboard. "I've made a schedule of appointments and..." I held up my hand. I'll manage my own schedule. What I need from all of you is respect for my decisions and my privacy. Knox frowned. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. The financial situation alone is being addressed, I interrupted. My greenhouse business is undergoing some changes that should secure its future. What changes? Pax asked, speaking for the first time. You've been trying to save that place for years. I smiled, thinking of the plans taking shape, of Dell's press release already sent to local media, of Thaddeus's commitment from the Botanical Trust. Let's just say I found a new purpose for my life's work, I replied, one that might surprise you. As they left, frustrated by my vagueness, but unable to argue with my firm stance, I felt lighter than I had in years. The cancer still lurked in my body, a silent threat. My financial troubles weren't magically solved, but for the first time since Joseph's death, I had direction, purpose, and allies who valued me for more than an expected inheritance. That night, I slept in my own bed, dreaming not of death, but of rare flowers blooming in unlikely places, pushing through concrete and stone to reach the light. The chemotherapy hit me like a northern Minnesota blizzard, sudden, violent, and transforming the landscape of my body into something unrecognizable. My hair, once thick and silver, fell out in clumps that I gathered silently from my pillow each morning. My nails turned brittle. Food tasted like metal. But unlike a blizzard that eventually melts away, the treatment effects intensified with each session. You don't have to do this, Dell told me after driving me home from my third treatment. There are other approaches, less aggressive ones. I sat at my kitchen table, forcing down the anti-nausea medication with lukewarm tea. Dr. Henderson says this gives me the best chance. At what cost? Dell's forthright gaze met mine. You're killing yourself to avoid dying. Perhaps she was right. The aggressive treatment protocol I'd chosen, surgery followed by intense chemotherapy, was designed for patients decades younger. But something in me, some stubborn Czech spirit inherited from my father, refused to take the gentler path. Meanwhile, the Kovich Institute for Botanical Preservation was taking shape with surprising speed. Thaddeus had secured initial funding from the Botanical Trust. The university had evaluated my collection and declared several species scientifically significant. Local media had picked up Dell's press release, running a feature on my decades of work preserving Minnesota's native flora alongside exotic species from around the world. My children had noticed too, though they'd said nothing directly. Pax had left a newspaper clipping on my coffee table during a visit. The article about the institute circled in red pen. Beryl had asked pointed questions about new business arrangements while driving me to a doctor's appointment. Knox had called from Texas, his voice carefully casual as he inquired about changes at the greenhouse. I told them nothing concrete, not yet, not until I was certain the institute would survive without me should the treatments fail. 6 weeks after my birthday revelation, I sat in my greenhouse office reviewing the nonprofit incorporation papers with Octavia Monroe, the lawyer Dell had introduced me to. At 53, Octavia specialized in establishing charitable foundations and had taken on my case with unexpected enthusiasm after seeing my collection. My mother was a gardener, she'd explained during our first meeting. She grew roses that made people stop their cars to look at them. I never inherited her green thumb, but I understand passion when I see it. Now she pointed to the signature line on the final document. Once you sign this, the Kovich Institute officially exists as a legal entity. Your collection and research will belong to the Institute, not to you personally. Meaning, my children can't claim it as an asset? Octavia nodded, her expression serious. Exactly. They could contest your will, but not the Institute's separate legal status, especially with the university partnership and the Botanical Trust's endorsement. I stared at the line where my signature would go. This decision would ensure my life's work continued, but it would also confirm what I'd told my children at that disastrous birthday dinner. There would be no inheritance, no financial windfall upon my death. As if reading my thoughts, Octavia said gently, "This doesn't mean you're disinheriting them. It means you're creating a legacy that benefits everyone, including future generations." I signed my name, my full name, Wilhelmina Kovacs, not the Willie I'd adopted in America to make others comfortable. The formal signature felt right for this moment. What happens next? I asked, flexing my fingers against the growing numbness from chemotherapy. We file these papers, then begin transitioning your business operations. The retail side will be scaled back while we develop the conservation and research programs. Octavia gathered the documents. And we'll need to appoint a board of directors. Thaddeus has agreed to serve, I said. And Dell, of course. You should consider including one of your children, Octavia suggested. It might help them feel connected to your legacy rather than excluded from it. I shook my head. They've shown no interest in my work, only in what it might be worth. People can surprise you when given responsibility instead of expectations. I promised to consider it, though I couldn't imagine which of my children might actually care about preserving rare plant species. Knox was allergic to most flowering plants. Beryl had once suggested I replace my greenhouse with rental properties. Pax at least remembered the Latin names of a few specimens from his childhood, but had shown no interest in botany as an adult. That evening, exhausted from the meeting and another round of treatment side effects, I rested in Joseph's chair by the window. Outside, spring had fully arrived in Minnesota, the late May sunshine coaxing reluctant flowers from the still cool earth. Despite my fatigue, I felt a deep satisfaction. The institute was real. My work would continue. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. Pax stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking more like his father than ever with his furrowed brow and slight stoop. "I brought dinner," he said, holding up a bag from my favorite Polish restaurant. "Pierogi and borscht. I remember you said hospital food was terrible." I hadn't been hospitalized yet, but I didn't correct him. The gesture itself was unexpected enough. As we ate at the kitchen table, or rather, as Pax ate and I pushed food around my plate, unable to tolerate much, he asked about the greenhouse. Not about its value or my plans for it, but about the plants themselves. "The newspaper said, you have species thought to be extinct in the wild," he said between bites. "Is that true?" "Several," I replied cautiously. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "I was telling a client about it. He collects unusual specimens for his home. Stuffed birds mostly. But he asked if preserved plants could be mounted and displayed like my taxidermy work." I winced at the thought. Plants aren't meant to be dead decorations. That's what I told him. But it got me thinking about preservation. Pax set down his fork. "Mom, what's really happening with the greenhouse? This institute thing. It's not just a legal maneuver to avoid inheritance tax, is it?" The directness of the question surprised me. Of my 3 children, Pax had always been the most indirect, approaching difficult topics sideways, if at all. "No," I said finally. "It's about ensuring the work continues. These plants, some of them I've nurtured for 40 years, they matter beyond their monetary value." Something flickered in Pax's expression. Understanding, perhaps, or at least curiosity. "Could I see them? Not just the retail area, but the special ones you keep in the back?" The request was so unexpected that I simply nodded. "Tomorrow, if you're free. It's better to see them in morning light." The next day, Pax arrived promptly at 9, dressed not in his usual rumpled clothing, but in clean jeans and a button-down shirt, as if visiting somewhere important. I led him through the retail area, now managed primarily by my part-time employee, and unlocked the door to the research greenhouses. The humid air enveloped us as we entered. Morning light filtered through the glass ceiling, creating a cathedral-like glow among the green leaves and colorful blooms. Pax's eyes widened as he took in the separate chambers, each with its own microclimate. "Dad built all this?" he asked, running his hand along one of the wooden supports. "Designed it himself," I confirmed, before computers made it easy to regulate temperature and humidity. I showed him my prized specimens, the Minnesota ladies' slipper orchids I'd been propagating for decades, the Central European alpine flowers that reminded me of my childhood, the experimental hybrids I'd developed that could withstand increasingly erratic weather patterns. "This one," I said, pointing to a small plant with delicate white flowers, "is believed extinct in Czechoslovakia since the communist regime built factories over its native habitat. These may be the only living specimens outside of a few European botanical gardens." Pax leaned closer, examining the plant with unexpected intensity. "You grew these from seeds. Cuttings, originally. Smuggled out by a colleague when I was still in Prague." I smiled at the memory. Highly illegal at the time. My law-abiding mother, A plant smuggler. Pax laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him in years. Conservation requires occasional rule-bending, I replied. Nature doesn't recognize human borders. We spent 3 hours in the greenhouse, far longer than I'd anticipated. My stamina, compromised by treatment, began to flag, but I pushed through the fatigue. Pax asked intelligent questions, showing an unexpected capacity for absorbing botanical information. You have a good eye, I told him, as we examined a particularly rare orchid. You notice details. It's necessary in taxidermy, he said. Getting the eyes right, the angle of the head. The smallest details make the difference between a lifeless mount and one that seems about to move. I'd always found his profession slightly macabre, preserving dead things to mimic life. Now I saw it differently, as a form of conservation, preserving the memory and form of creatures for those who might never see them alive. The Institute will need people who understand preservation, I said carefully. Different perspectives. Pax straightened up, meeting my eyes directly. Are you offering me a job, Mom? A board position, possibly, if you're interested. He was quiet for a long moment, looking around at the greenhouse my husband had built, at the plants I had nurtured, at this world he had grown up adjacent to, but never fully entered. I'd need to learn a lot more, he said finally. Everyone starts somewhere, I replied, quoting what Joseph used to tell our children when they tried something new. Later, after Pax had gone and I rested on the small daybed I kept in my office, I considered Octavia's words about giving responsibility instead of expectations. Perhaps one of my children could surprise me after all. The following week brought new challenges. My 4th chemotherapy session left me weaker than before, necessitating a brief hospital stay for dehydration. Knox flew in from Texas, ostensibly to help but spending most of his time in hushed phone conversations about work. Beryl efficiently organized my medications and appointment calendar, but treated me like a project rather than a person. Only Pax sat quietly with me, occasionally asking about the greenhouse or telling me stories about his taxidermy clients to distract me from the discomfort. During one of these visits, while Knox and Beryl were meeting with Dr. Henderson about my care plan, Pax brought up the Institute again. Knox found the incorporation papers in your study, he said without preamble. He's talking about challenging them. A cold wave of anger washed through me, despite the warming blankets the nurses had provided. On what grounds? Diminished capacity due to illness. Undue influence from your friends. Pax shrugged. He's grasping at straws, but he's serious. Beryl is considering supporting him. And you? I asked, studying my youngest child's face. Pax met my gaze steadily. I told them they were being vultures. Dad would be ashamed. For a moment, I saw Joseph in him so clearly, the moral certainty, the quiet strength beneath the unassuming exterior. Thank you, I said simply. Don't thank me yet. They're coming here after meeting with the doctor, and they're planning to confront you about the Institute. He hesitated. Mom, how much does this really matter to you? Is it worth the fight in your condition? I pushed myself upright in the hospital bed, ignoring the pull of the IV in my arm. This isn't about money, Pax. It's about meaning. Everything I've done for 40 years, it can't just disappear when I do. He nodded slowly. Then I'll help you fight, but you should know what you're up against. When Knox and Beryl arrived, their expressions told me everything. Knox's jaw was set in the same way it had been when, at age 12, he'd decided to sell his baseball card collection, despite my objections. Beryl's eyes had the focused intensity she'd displayed when arguing for a later curfew as a teenager. We need to discuss the Institute, Mother, Knox began, closing the hospital room door firmly. Yes, we do, I agreed, surprising him. I was thinking Pax might take a board position. Perhaps you both would consider joining as well. The offer, which I hadn't planned to make, silenced them momentarily. This isn't about board positions. Beryl recovered first. It's about you making major financial decisions while undergoing intensive treatment. Decisions that affect all of us. My greenhouse hasn't belonged to all of us for quite some time, I replied. None of you has shown interest in it, except as a potential asset. That's not fair, Knox interjected. We have our own careers, our own lives. Exactly my point. Mom. Beryl's voice softened to the tone she used when persuading difficult clients. We're worried about you. These people, Dell, this Thaddeus person, the lawyer, they've appeared suddenly during a vulnerable time. Dell has been my friend for 30 years, I reminded her. Thaddeus was your father's colleague before becoming mine. And they're encouraging you to sign away assets while you're undergoing chemotherapy, Knox said. That's textbook exploitation. I looked at my oldest son, Joseph's firstborn, the child who had once followed me through the greenhouse, asking endless questions about each plant. When had money become more important to him than knowledge? The Institute ensures my life's work continues, I said quietly. That these plants, many of which exist nowhere else, survive beyond me. If that's not important to you, then perhaps you've forgotten what truly matters. The room fell silent. Outside in the hospital corridor, I could hear the rhythmic sounds of medical equipment, the squeaking of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum, the distant chime of an elevator. We just want what's best for you, Beryl said finally. No, I replied, the clarity of truth giving strength to my voice despite my weakened state. You want what's best for yourselves. There's a difference. I watched the words land, saw the flicker of recognition and shame cross their faces. Even Knox, ever the pragmatist, looked away momentarily. The Institute moves forward, I continued. You're welcome to be part of it, to help shape this legacy. Or you can fight me and discover just how much Czech stubbornness remains in this old body, cancer or no cancer. Before they could respond, a nurse entered to check my vital signs, effectively ending the conversation. But as my children filed out, Pax lingered behind, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You know, he said, you just might outlive us all, out of sheer spite. For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A real laugh that hurt my chest, but lightened my heart. That, my son, is the plan. Autumn came to Minnesota with a spectacular show of color. The maples along my street turned fierce shades of crimson and orange, while the aspens shimmered gold against the evergreens. 6 months had passed since my birthday revelation, 5 months since the formation of the Kovich Institute, and 4 cycles of chemotherapy since my diagnosis. My latest scan showed the cancer in retreat. Not gone, but diminished. Remarkable response, doctor. Henderson had called it, particularly given my age. I'd simply nodded, unsurprised. Stubbornness ran in my family. The greenhouse, now officially the research center of the Kovach Institute, had undergone its own transformation. University students worked among my rare specimens, carefully documenting growth patterns and cataloging genetic information. The retail space had been converted into an education center where visitors could learn about endangered plant species and conservation efforts. My hair was growing back, soft and downy as a baby bird's feathers, but entirely white now instead of the silver-streaked gray it had been before. My body felt simultaneously older, joints stiffer, movements more deliberate, and curiously renewed, as if the poison that had targeted the cancer had burned away other accumulated toxins as well. You look like a dandelion gone to seed, Dell remarked one morning as we sat in my kitchen. All white fluff and determination. I smoothed a hand over my head. At least something's growing. More than something, she replied, gesturing toward the window where my garden flourished in the autumn sunshine. The Institute has 3 major grants now. Thaddeus says the university wants to establish a permanent partnership, and Pax has brought in 2 new board members with conservation backgrounds. Pax, my youngest, had surprised us all, throwing himself into the Institute's work with unexpected passion. His skills as a taxidermist translated well to the delicate work of preserving plant specimens, and his business acumen, previously directed at his struggling shop, proved valuable in establishing the Institute's operational systems. Knox and Beryl had taken different paths. After the hospital confrontation, Knox had retreated to Texas, communicating mainly through terse emails and occasional phone calls. Beryl had attempted a corporate takeover of sorts, attending board meetings with pointed questions about financial structures and future plans. When it became clear that the Institute was legitimate and legitimately focused on conservation rather than profit, she'd gradually shifted from skepticism to reluctant respect. The Botanical Magazine wants to feature your alpine restoration work next spring, Dell continued, pouring more tea. And that PBS documentary crew is coming next week. I nodded, still finding it strange that others found my life's work noteworthy. For decades, I had cultivated my rare specimens in relative obscurity, driven by personal passion rather than public recognition. Now, approaching 80, I was suddenly noteworthy. Have you decided what you'll tell them about the birthday dinner? Dell asked, always direct. They'll want the origin story. The birthday dinner, the toast, the revelation. It had become almost mythological among the small circle of people now involved with the Institute, the dramatic catalyst that had transformed a failing greenhouse into a conservation center. I'll tell them the truth, I replied, that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what matters. The documentary crew arrived on a Tuesday, setting up equipment in the greenhouse where the morning light created natural spotlights among the foliage. The director, a earnest woman in her 40s with a clipboard and sensible shoes, explained they were filming a series on late-life reinvention. We're particularly interested in how your medical diagnosis influenced your decision to establish the Institute, she explained, positioning me near a display of endangered orchids. I adjusted my silk scarf, a concession to the camera and to my still thin hair. The diagnosis was a factor, but not in the way people might assume. How so? She asked, signaling the cameraman to begin recording. I considered how to distill months of emotional upheaval into a soundbite. Cancer forces clarity. When you might have limited time, you stop worrying about pleasing others and focus on what truly matters. We spoke for nearly 3 hours. I showed them my rarest specimens, explained propagation techniques for endangered species, and demonstrated the climate control systems Joseph had designed decades ago. I spoke of coming to America as a young botanist, of building the greenhouse while raising 3 children, of the years after Joseph's death when I'd nearly lost everything. And your children? The director asked eventually. How do they feel about the Institute? Before I could answer, the greenhouse door opened, and Pax entered with Thaddeus, deep in conversation about a new alpine specimen we'd acquired from a botanical garden in Switzerland. Behind them came Octavia Monroe, carrying legal documents for me to sign. My son, I said, gesturing to Pax, who serves on our board and manages our preservation program. The camera swung toward him. Pax, normally camera-shy, straightened his shoulders and spoke confidently about our conservation work. I watched with a mixture of pride and wonder. Was this the same son who months ago had stood silently by as his siblings toasted to my last birthday? After the crew left, promising to return for follow-up filming, I sat in my office reviewing the grant proposals Octavia had brought. The Institute was growing beyond what I could personally oversee, especially with my health still fragile. We need to hire an executive director, Octavia said. Someone to manage daily operations. Pax could do it, I suggested. She shook her head. He's more valuable in the preservation work. We need someone with nonprofit management experience. I sighed, recognizing the truth in her words. The Institute had outgrown my kitchen table management style. Success brought its own complications. My phone rang, Knox, calling from Texas. These calls had become more frequent recently, though still awkward, filled with long pauses and careful phrasings. The documentary crew contacted me, he said after brief pleasantries. Asked for an interview about the Institute. And? I kept my voice neutral. I told them I'm proud of what you've built. The words came out stiffly, as if rehearsed. That's true, Mom. It's not what I expected, but it's impressive. Coming from Knox, who measured success in fiscal quarters and investment returns, this was significant praise. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I hadn't realized I still carried. Thank you, I said simply. I also told them I'm establishing a matching fund for the Institute's endowment, he continued. Every dollar donated, I'll match up to $100,000. I nearly dropped the phone. Knox, it's tax deductible, he added quickly, defaulting to practicality. And good PR for my company, corporate social responsibility and all that. But we both knew it was more. It was acknowledgement, acceptance, perhaps even the beginning of atonement. Beryl's handling the legal structure, he continued. She says you need proper endowment management to ensure long-term sustainability. So they had been talking, these children of mine, making plans. Not to control or to claim, but to support. I found myself blinking back unexpected tears. I'm coming for Thanksgiving, Knox added, if that's all right. Of course, I replied, thinking of the family gatherings that had become increasingly perfunctory over the years. I'd like that. After the call ended, I walked slowly through the greenhouse, touching leaves and petals as I went, greeting each plant like an old friend. The late afternoon sun slanted through the glass roof, creating dappled patterns on the earthen floor. In the education center, a university student was explaining pollination to a group of school children whose faces showed varying degrees of interest and boredom. Life continuing, knowledge being shared. Precisely what I had hoped for when we established the institute. That evening, Pax stopped by the house with Chinese takeout, now a weekly tradition as my appetite had improved post-treatment. As we ate, he updated me on the Alpine Specimen Project and a new partnership with a seed bank in Norway. Beryl called me about the endowment fund, he said, reaching for another egg roll. Knox's matching grant. She wants to announce it at the holiday fundraiser. I nodded, still processing this unexpected development. It's generous of him. It's the least he could do, Pax replied, then caught himself. Sorry, I'm trying to be less judgmental. Progress, not perfection. I quoted one of Joseph's favorite sayings. Pax smiled. Speaking of progress, I've been meaning to ask you something. About the toast. My chopsticks paused halfway to my mouth. The toast? At your birthday. When Knox said, he trailed off, then continued more carefully. When we thought you overheard us talking about your diagnosis and inheritance, I set down my chopsticks. I did overhear you. All of you. Pax shifted uncomfortably. That's the thing, Mom. Knox was talking about a surprise party for next year. Your 70th. He called it your last big birthday bash, before you'd probably want quieter celebrations. Beryl was worried you'd suspect we were planning something. The food turned tasteless in my mouth as I processed his words. But you mentioned my diagnosis, the doctor's office. Beryl saw your medical file when she drove you to an appointment. She was worried, telling us we needed to be prepared to help you through treatment. He met my eyes directly. We weren't toasting to your death, Mom. We were planning for your life. The room seemed to tilt slightly. All these months, the righteous anger that had fueled my transformation, my determination, my reinvention, had it been based on a misunderstanding? A misheard conversation? But when I told you about the debts, about there being no inheritance, you all looked so shocked, so disappointed, I insisted. Pax nodded. We were shocked. Not about money, but about you keeping the diagnosis secret, trying to handle everything alone. Knox was angry that you didn't trust us enough to tell us yourself. I thought back to that evening, to the expressions on my children's faces. Had I seen disappointment over money, or hurt over my silence? Had I projected my own fears onto their reactions? Why didn't you say something? These past months, while I've been building the institute, pulling away. At first, we didn't realize what you thought you'd heard, Pax explained. Then, when it became clear, Knox thought it was better to let you be angry. He said the anger was helping you fight the cancer. Pax smiled wryly. Besides, he pointed out that the institute is doing important work, whether it started from a misunderstanding or not. I sat back in my chair, feeling suddenly very old and very foolish. I've misjudged you all. Not entirely, Pax replied. We should have been more involved in your life before the diagnosis, more interested in your work. That part is on us. We finished our meal in thoughtful silence. As Pax was leaving, he turned back at the door. Mom, regardless of how it started, what you've built matters. And how you fought the cancer, that was all you. Stubborn, determined you. After he left, I sat in Joseph's chair watching nightfall over the garden. The misunderstanding changed nothing, really. The institute existed. The conservation work continued. My cancer was in retreat. My relationship with my children was healing in ways I couldn't have imagined 6 months ago. Sometimes we find the right path for the wrong reasons. The destination remains valuable, even if the journey began with a misstep. The next morning, I woke early and drove to the greenhouse before the staff arrived. In the quiet morning light, I moved among my plants, examining new growth, removing faded blooms, checking moisture levels. The familiar tasks centered me, connecting me to every version of myself I had ever been. The young Czech immigrant passionate about preserving her homeland's flora, the mother teaching her children the Latin names of flowers, the widow fighting to save her husband's legacy, the cancer patient refusing to surrender to either disease or despair. In the Alpine room, our newest acquisition was beginning to flower. Tiny white blooms unfurling on a plant thought extinct in the wild for decades. I knelt carefully beside it, breathing in its subtle fragrance. This species might outlast me by centuries now, its genetic material preserved, its beauty documented, its importance recognized. Dell found me there an hour later, still kneeling despite my protesting knees. "Board meeting in 30 minutes, she reminded me. "Beryl's bringing preliminary designs for the new research wing." I nodded, accepting her hand to help me stand. "Did you know?" I asked. "About the misunderstanding? The birthday toast?" Dell's expression confirmed she had. "Would you have built all this if you'd known the truth?" she countered, gesturing around at the greenhouse, now a renowned research center. "Perhaps not," I admitted. "Then sometimes misunderstandings serve a purpose," she said pragmatically. "Besides, your children needed the wake-up call, and you needed to remember your own strength." I smiled, thinking of Joseph and what he might say about all this. Probably one of his proverbs about mistaking the path but finding the right destination anyway. Outside, frost sparkled on the grass, Minnesota's warning of the winter to come. But inside the greenhouse, protected and nurtured, plants from around the world thrived in their carefully controlled environments. Life continuing against the odds, beauty persisting, knowledge preserved and shared. As I prepared for the board meeting, my children now among my closest allies in conservation, I thought about how growth often requires disruption. Seeds need to break open before they can sprout. Forests regenerate after fire. And sometimes, an elderly botanist needs to misinterpret a birthday toast to remember that her life's work matters, not just to her, but to the world. The Institute's boardroom, once my greenhouse office, was now furnished with a long table and comfortable chairs. Professionally framed photographs of rare specimens lined the walls, alongside conservation awards and press clippings. As board members filed in, I observed how different this room felt from the solitary space where I had once worked alone, fighting to keep my business afloat. Beryl arrived first, precisely on time as always, carrying architectural renderings for the proposed research wing. She wore her trademark tailored suit, but something was different. A small enamel pin of a lady's slipper orchid on her lapel, one of the endangered species we were working to preserve. "The architects included the sustainable features we discussed," she said, laying out the designs. "Rainwater collection, solar panels, geothermal heating for the winter. It'll increase the initial cost, but save money long-term." Her language, once focused exclusively on quarterly profits, now included terms like sustainable and long-term. Small shifts perhaps, but meaningful ones. Knox arrived next, his Texas tan contrasting with Minnesota's November pallor. He'd brought his teenage daughter Eliza with him, a quiet girl I rarely saw due to distance and family dynamics. "Eliza's doing a school project on conservation," Knox explained. "Thought she could interview you about the Institute." Grandma," Eliza said, her voice carrying that adolescent mixture of confidence and uncertainty. "Dad says your greenhouse has flowers that don't exist anywhere else. Is that true?" I glanced at Knox, surprised by both his knowledge and his apparent interest in explaining my work to his daughter. "Some species are extremely rare," I replied, warming to my favorite subject. "After the meeting, I'll show you our propagation lab where we're growing seedlings from nearly extinct varieties." Eliza's face lit up. "That would be amazing. My science teacher says biodiversity loss is one of the biggest environmental crises we face." Her enthusiasm, the passion of youth not yet tempered by practicality or compromise, reminded me of myself at her age, discovering the wonders of plant diversity in the forests outside Prague. How had I never realized I had a granddaughter who shared my interests? Pax arrived last, accompanied by Thaddeus and 2 university researchers. He'd grown a beard in recent months, making him look older, more established. The nervous energy that had always characterized him had settled into purposeful confidence. The meeting progressed with updates on ongoing projects, the Alpine Conservation Initiative, the Seed Bank Partnership, the educational programs that now brought school groups through the greenhouse weekly. Beryl presented the expansion plans, Knox discussed the matching fund, and Pax reported on new preservation techniques being developed for especially fragile species. I spoke little, content to observe this transformation, not just of my greenhouse into an institute, but of my children into partners in a shared mission. The bitter seeds planted at that birthday dinner had somehow, against all odds, blossomed into something beautiful. After the formal meeting concluded, I took Eliza on the promised tour. Her questions were insightful, her interest genuine. In the propagation lab, she bent over a tray of seedlings, examining their minute details with a magnifying glass. "These are so tiny," she marveled. "And each one could grow into a full plant?" "Each one carries the complete genetic code of its species," I explained. "In the right conditions, with proper care, even the smallest seed can flourish. Kind of like the Institute," she said thoughtfully. "It started small, but grew into something important. Out of the mouths of teenagers, wisdom that stopped me short." Yes, the Institute had grown from a desperate attempt to preserve my work into something that might actually help save endangered species for generations to come. That evening, my house filled with family in a way it hadn't for years. Knox, staying in town for Thanksgiving, had ordered takeout for everyone. Beryl had brought her husband, a quiet accountant I'd always liked but rarely saw. Pax arrived with dessert from my favorite bakery. Eliza showed her father the photos she'd taken in the greenhouse for her project. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Institute business, but also branching into personal territories. Beryl's recent interest in gardening, Knox's consideration of moving back to Minnesota part-time, Pax's ideas for community involvement programs. As I observed them from Joseph's chair, now my permanent perch during family gatherings, I felt an unfamiliar emotion, contentment. Not the fiery determination that had fueled my recent months, nor the bitter anger of that birthday night, but something quieter and more sustaining. My cancer wasn't gone. My age wasn't reversible. The mistakes and misunderstandings of the past couldn't be undone. But here, in this room, something had healed that went beyond physical illness or family disagreements. Some essential connection had been restored. After everyone left, promising to return for a proper Thanksgiving dinner, I went to my bedroom and opened the drawer where I kept Joseph's letters. We had written to each other during our courtship when I was still in Prague, and he already in America. His English had been imperfect then, his Czech better, but still accented with Slovak influences from his mother. "My Wilhelmina," one letter began, "I dream of the greenhouse we will build together. A place where rare things are protected, where beauty that might be lost finds sanctuary. Like you, coming from your troubled country to this new place. Like me, finding in you the rarest flower of all." Joseph had understood from the beginning what had taken me nearly 80 years to learn, that preservation wasn't just about plants or species or biodiversity. It was about protecting what matters: beauty, knowledge, connections, legacy. The next morning dawned clear and cold, frost etching delicate patterns on my bedroom window. In the greenhouse, the board meeting preparations were already underway for our special holiday session. The documentary crew would be filming again, capturing the Institute's work and, though they didn't realize it, the healed relationships that now sustained it. My phone buzzed with a text from Eliza. "Grandma, can I bring a friend to see the orchid lab? She's also doing a project on endangered species." I smiled as I typed back, "The more the merrier. The future of conservation depends on young people like you." And it did. The Institute would outlast me, was already operating beyond my daily involvement. The board functioned smoothly whether I attended meetings or not. The research continued, the education programs expanded, the conservation work progressed. My life's work had transcended my life itself, becoming something self-sustaining. As I dressed for the day, choosing another emerald green outfit, now my signature color for Institute functions, I thought about Joseph's letters, about seeds and legacy, about misunderstandings that lead to unexpected blessings. Dr. Henderson had called yesterday with my latest scan results. "Stable," she'd said. "No new growth. Continue as you are. Not remission, not yet. But time. More time than I'd feared 6 months ago. Time to see the Institute's work unfold, to know my grandchildren better, to witness spring returning to my garden once more." If you've been moved by my story, please subscribe to hear more tales of resilience and renewal. And if you know someone who needs reminding of their own strength, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need to be reminded that it's never too late to bloom.